What happens when we die? What if death is not the end, but simply the transformation of information? What if the essence of who we are, our consciousness, our soul, our identity, does not simply vanish, but undergoes a shift, a transformation, into something that transcends the boundaries of life and death? What if, instead of disappearing forever, we continue to exist not in the physical form we know, but as something deeper, more fundamental, a ripple in the fabric of the universe? For millennia, humans have wrestled with the question of what happens after death. Every culture, every religion, and every philosophy has sought to understand the mystery that defines the end of life. Does death mark the end of consciousness? Or is it a mere transition into another state of being? Is the mind simply the product of the brain? And when the body dies, does everything we are, our thoughts, our memories, our very sense of self, cease to exist? Or is there something more, something beyond the physical body, that endures beyond the moment of death? It is the question that haunts every human being, and yet, despite all our scientific and philosophical advancements, we are still no closer to an answer. The idea of immortality, of life beyond death, has captivated the human imagination for centuries. But what if immortality is not about eternal life in a physical form, but about the transformation of consciousness, the continuation of information in ways we cannot yet fully comprehend? The end or a transformation? When we think of death, the most common image that comes to mind is of a final, irreversible end, a complete cessation of life. We picture the body, no longer functioning, as an inert vessel, and our consciousness, which seemed so vivid and alive, vanishing without a trace. The physical body decays, the brain stops firing, and all that remains of us is our memory in the minds of others. But what if death is not truly an end? What if it is instead a transition? The moment when the energy and information that make up our consciousness shift into a different form. Instead of the abrupt termination of existence, what if death is a transformation, a process that changes the nature of our consciousness, allowing it to persist in some way beyond the confines of the body? One of the central ideas in the philosophy of mind and consciousness studies is that our consciousness is more than just a product of the brain. It is something that could transcend the biological processes of the body, an information system that exists as patterns of energy and structure. If this is true, then perhaps death doesn't signal the end of who we are, but rather the reorganization or redistribution of the information that makes us us. This idea leads us to the concept of information theory, a framework that has revolutionized the way we think about consciousness. In this view, consciousness itself is not a tangible object but an informational construct, a system of data that is encoded in the physical structure of the brain. If consciousness is information, then it could theoretically be transferred, preserved, or even recreated in another form after the physical body has passed. Theories of information and consciousness. In recent years, the concept of information as the foundation of consciousness has gained more attention, particularly in the field of quantum consciousness. Thinkers like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have proposed that consciousness may be linked to quantum processes within the brain's microtubules. If this is the case, then consciousness could be seen as a quantum state, a non-local phenomenon that is not tied to the body in the same way that traditional neurological models suggest. This leads to a profound question. If consciousness is not confined to the brain, what happens to it when the body dies? According to some theories, if consciousness is a quantum state or an informational process, it might exist independently of the physical body. In this sense, death may not be the end of consciousness, but a transition, a shift from one state of existence to another, much like how a physical process such as water changing from a liquid to a gas can transform without disappearing entirely. This concept is echoed in theories of mind like panpsychism, which suggest that consciousness may be a fundamental property of the universe, existing in varying degrees in all forms of matter, from particles to galaxies. If consciousness is indeed a universal constant, then perhaps death doesn't extinguish it, but rather transforms it into another form, a form that could exist outside the confines of our physical bodies. A timeless essence? For millennia, religious traditions have proposed the idea of the soul as a timeless essence that survives death. From ancient Egypt to modern Christianity, the soul is often depicted as the eternal part of a person that transcends physical death and enters an afterlife or continues in some spiritual realm. While this idea may seem metaphysical and beyond the reach of scientific understanding, there is an increasing recognition that consciousness may not be entirely tied to the body. If consciousness is not a purely biological process, perhaps the soul is a metaphysical construct, a form of information that survives death, continuing its existence beyond the physical world. Some modern theorists suggest that the soul may be the informational core of our consciousness, a quantum system that is not bound by the physical limitations of the body. In this view, when we die, it is not the end of consciousness, but the end of the biological carrier of the soul. The soul, as pure information, may persist perhaps even in a quantum state, allowing the essence of who we are to endure beyond the limitations of the body. This would imply that death is not a final event, but a transition, a process in which the soul or consciousness continues in some form, whether that be as a quantum entity, a universal consciousness, or even a form of reincarnation. Rather than seeing death as a door that closes forever, we might view it as a gateway to another state of being, one that is still tied to the fabric of the universe, still connected to the informational structure of reality. The intersection of science and spirituality. The idea that consciousness could survive death is often met with skepticism, particularly by those who adhere strictly to materialistic views of the brain and mind. However, as we explore the intersection of science and spirituality, the possibility that consciousness is a quantum or informational phenomenon begins to offer a more profound understanding of life and death. If consciousness is a form of information, then it may not be tied to the brain at all. It may exist on a level beyond the physical, something that, once it leaves the body, can persist in different forms. In recent years, quantum theory has suggested that consciousness may not be confined to our physical senses, but is capable of interacting with the quantum field, a vast, underlying realm of information and energy that permeates the universe. If this is true, then death may not represent an end, but a shift in the way consciousness interacts with the world around us. Rather than vanishing forever, consciousness might enter into another state, another form potentially even existing in the quantum field itself. This concept aligns with certain ideas in spirituality, where death is not an end, but a transition, the soul moving from one state of being to another. Whether we view this transition as entering an afterlife, merging with the cosmos, or simply shifting to another dimension, the core idea remains the same. Consciousness is not destroyed by death. It is transformed, and it endures. Death as an end versus death as a transition. At the heart of the question of immortality lies a stark contrast. On one side, we have the traditional view that death is the end, the final cessation of consciousness, where the body decays and all aspects of self cease to exist. On the other side, we have the idea that death is a transition, the transformation of information, where the soul, consciousness, or essence of who we are continues to exist in some form, whether as part of the quantum field, a different reality, or a higher state of being. This debate is not just philosophical or metaphysical, it is rooted in scientific inquiry as well. As quantum mechanics and theories of consciousness evolve, the line between science and spirituality begins to blur. If consciousness is more than just a byproduct of the brain, then the possibility that it continues after death becomes increasingly plausible. Whether through the lens of quantum information, the continuity of the soul, or the merging of individual consciousness with universal awareness, death may not be the end, but a gateway to something far more profound. The eternal mystery of immortality, the question of immortality. What happens when we die remains one of the most profound mysteries of existence. Whether we view death as the end of consciousness or a transition into another state of being, the mystery of the soul, the essence of consciousness, and the possibility of life after death continues to fascinate and inspire. In the intersections of science, philosophy, and spirituality, we find a tantalizing glimpse of what could be, and the journey of understanding may only just be beginning. For now, we are left with a powerful, open-ended question. What if death is not the end, but simply the transformation of information, the continuation of consciousness in a form we cannot yet understand? What are we really? What if the essence of who you are, your thoughts, your feelings, your very sense of being, is not just a byproduct of your brain, but something more profound, more fundamental to the universe? What if consciousness is not simply the result of billions of neurons firing in complex patterns, but something that transcends the physical world, existing beyond time and space? Consciousness is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. It is the core of who we are, the force that gives us self-awareness, the ability to think, reflect, and perceive the world around us. And yet, despite centuries of inquiry from both science and philosophy, we are no closer to understanding what consciousness truly is. How does the mind emerge from the brain? Or does it? Is consciousness a physical process, something created by the activity of neurons and chemicals? Or is it something far more profound, something fundamental to the universe itself, something that exists independently of the brain? This is the question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists alike for centuries, and it remains one of the most fundamental questions in our quest to understand the nature of reality. To better understand this enigma, we must look at the various theories that attempt to explain the nature of consciousness, each offering a unique perspective on the mind and its relationship to the body, the brain, and the universe. Consciousness as an emergent property of the brain, one of the most widely accepted theories of consciousness, is materialism. The view that consciousness is entirely emergent from the physical processes of the brain. According to this theory, consciousness arises as a product of the brain's complexity, a byproduct of neurons firing and synapses transmitting signals. Materialism posits that the mind is not separate from the body, but rather an extension of the brain's activity. In other words, consciousness is nothing more than the output of the brain's electrical and chemical processes. This view has its roots in the scientific revolution, particularly with the work of Descartes and later thinkers who sought to explain the mind as a purely physical phenomenon. Neuroscience has made tremendous strides in mapping the brain's activity to conscious experience. Through fMRI scans and EEG studies, we can now observe how specific brain areas light up during certain activities, such as thinking, feeling, or perceiving. From a materialist standpoint, consciousness can be explained by the brain's wiring and its chemical interactions. In this model, consciousness is like software running on a hardware system, the brain. The complexity of neural connections, the patterns of electrical impulses, and the biochemical processes together give rise to thoughts, emotions, and the sense of self-awareness. When the brain ceases to function, as in the case of death, consciousness is believed to simply cease to exist. It is gone, extinguished forever, an inevitable conclusion of the body's breakdown. While materialism offers a clear, empirically grounded explanation of consciousness, it leaves some profound questions unanswered. How do these neural processes give rise to subjective experience? How do electrical signals in the brain create the vivid, immersive world of thoughts, dreams, and emotions? This remains the hard problem of consciousness, a question that materialism struggles to answer fully. The mind and body, as separate entities. In contrast to materialism, dualism offers a view of consciousness that places the mind and body in separate realms. Dualism, famously proposed by René Descartes, argues that the mind and body are two distinct substances. The body is composed of physical matter, while the mind is a non-material substance, fundamentally different from the body. According to dualism consciousness, the mind exists independently of the physical brain. The brain may interact with the mind, but the mind itself is not bound by the physical laws that govern the body. Dualism offers an elegant solution to the hard problem of consciousness. If the mind is separate from the brain, then we don't need to explain how subjective experience arises from physical processes. The mind, in this view, is immaterial, a non-physical entity that exists outside the constraints of space and time. Thoughts, emotions, and awareness arise from the mind, which interacts with the physical body through the brain, but is not limited by it. However, dualism also faces significant challenges. If the mind is not material, how does it interact with the body? If thoughts are immaterial, how can they influence physical processes like movement or speech? The interaction problem has long been a stumbling block for dualism, with no clear explanation for how the non-material mind could influence the physical brain. Moreover, dualism faces difficulty in reconciling with the findings of neuroscience, which continue to show how changes in the brain structure and chemistry can lead to changes in consciousness, suggesting a closer connection between mind and body than dualism allows. Consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe. Perhaps the most radical theory of consciousness is panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is not just an emergent property of the brain, but a fundamental feature of the universe itself. According to panpsychism, everything in the universe, from particles to galaxies, possesses some degree of consciousness. It is not that consciousness arises only in highly complex systems like human brains, but that consciousness is an intrinsic property of matter, present in all things. In this view, consciousness does not emerge from complexity. Rather, it is always present in some form, and the complexity of the brain allows for higher levels of awareness. Panpsychism suggests that even the smallest particles, such as electrons, may have some form of experience, though it would be radically different from human consciousness. For instance, an electron might have a rudimentary sense of being, a basic experience, but not the self-aware consciousness we associate with human beings. One of the most appealing aspects of panpsychism is that it avoids the problems of dualism and materialism by proposing that consciousness is not confined to the brain or to the human body, but is a universal property of all matter. This theory could potentially explain the continuity of consciousness and why it seems to be intrinsic to reality, as if it is woven into the very fabric of existence. However, panpsychism also faces significant challenges. If all matter is conscious, how do we explain the vast differences in the complexity of consciousness across different forms of matter? How do the seemingly primitive forms of consciousness in particles relate to the highly developed self-awareness we experience as humans? Additionally, the theory struggles to provide a detailed explanation of how consciousness exists in non-complex systems like atoms and molecules. Is consciousness a physical process or something beyond the brain? At the heart of these contrasting theories lies a central question. Is consciousness a physical process, a byproduct of the brain's activity, or is it something fundamental, something that transcends the brain and the physical world? Materialism suggests that consciousness arises from the physical processes in the brain. In this view, consciousness is simply the emergent property of neural activity. It is a biological phenomenon, much like digestion or circulation. When the brain stops functioning, consciousness ceases to exist, and we are gone. Dualism, on the other hand, argues that consciousness exists independently of the brain as a non-material essence that interacts with the body. In this view, consciousness can survive the death of the body and is not bound by the physical laws of the universe. It opens the door to the idea of an afterlife, or a continuation of consciousness beyond the death of the body. Panpsychism offers a third perspective, suggesting that consciousness is not just confined to humans, but is a universal property of all matter. In this view, consciousness does not emerge from complexity, but is always present in the fabric of reality itself. It allows for the possibility that consciousness is not confined to the brain, but exists as a fundamental feature of the universe, linking all things together. Consciousness as emergent versus consciousness as fundamental. The contrast between these views is profound. On one side, we have the materialist view, which sees consciousness as emergent from the brain's physical processes. Consciousness arises from the interactions of neurons and chemicals in the brain. When the brain stops working, consciousness stops too. On the other side, we have dualism and panpsychism, which suggest that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. According to these views, consciousness does not arise from the brain, but is a separate, non-material phenomenon that is not bound by the laws of physics. Whether as a non-material essence, dualism, or as a universal property of matter, panpsychism, consciousness is not confined to the body and could transcend the limitations of the physical world. This debate raises profound questions, not only about the nature of consciousness, but also about our place in the universe. Are we simply highly complex biochemical machines driven by physical processes, or is there something deeper, something more fundamental, at the core of who we are? The mystery of consciousness. As we continue to explore the nature of consciousness, we find ourselves facing a mystery that may never be fully understood. Whether consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, a separate non-material essence, or a fundamental property of the universe, the question remains one of the most profound and elusive in science and philosophy. In the end, perhaps it is not just a matter of what consciousness is, but how we experience it and what it reveals about the infinite possibilities of existence. The currency of the universe? What if the very fabric of the universe, the laws that govern the stars, the particles, and even our own consciousness is not made of matter, but of information? What if, beneath the surface of everything we see, there lies an underlying pattern of data, a complex web of codes and instructions that shapes every physical phenomenon, every particle, and even the very nature of our thoughts and experiences? What if information is the fundamental currency of the universe, the essence from which everything else arises? For centuries, we've understood the universe in terms of matter and energy, physical substances that interact according to fixed laws. But what if the laws of the universe themselves are nothing more than the rules of information? What if the physical phenomena we observe, from gravity to light to the workings of our own minds, are simply manifestations of underlying informational patterns? In the realms of physics and thermodynamics, information is emerging as a central concept. The idea that the universe is, in essence, an information processing system is gaining traction, particularly in the fields of quantum mechanics and cosmology. From the fundamental particles that make up the fabric of reality to the most complex structures in the universe, could everything, even consciousness itself, be reducible to information? If so, could information persist beyond the body and the brain, perhaps even surviving physical death? This section will explore the fascinating intersection of information theory, quantum physics, and the nature of consciousness, asking the fundamental question: is the universe itself a giant universal computer? And if so, what does that mean for the persistence of consciousness beyond death? The foundation of modern physics. The idea that information is central to understanding the universe isn't entirely new. In fact, it has roots in some of the most important developments in modern physics. For example, the second law of thermodynamics, which governs the flow of energy in the universe, can also be understood in terms of information. The law states that in a closed system, entropy, a measure of disorder, tends to increase over time, meaning that systems move toward more disordered states. But here's the twist. Entropy is actually a measure of information loss. When a system becomes more disordered, we lose information about the precise states of the particles that make it up. This realization led physicists to propose that information is the key to understanding entropy. If we view the universe as an information processing system, then the second law of thermodynamics becomes a principle that governs how information is distributed and reorganized over time. In quantum mechanics, information plays an even more pivotal role. The idea that information could be the fundamental building block of reality is known as the information hypothesis. According to this view, everything in the universe, from particles to galaxies, is essentially a manifestation of encoded information. The quantum state of a system, for example, can be described as a set of information that determines the probability of a system's behavior, such as the position of a particle. When a measurement is made, the information about the system collapses into a definite state, revealing a specific outcome. But quantum mechanics doesn't stop at the mere processing of information. In the famous black hole information paradox, scientists grapple with the question of whether information that falls into a black hole is lost forever or whether it can be recovered. Recent work suggests that information is never truly lost, even in a black hole. Instead, it may be encoded on the event horizon like a holographic projection, suggesting that the universe itself may be an information-based hologram, where everything we experience is a projection of deeper, underlying data. The universe is an information processing system. As we move from quantum mechanics to broader cosmological questions, the idea that the universe itself is an information processing system begins to take shape. This idea, proposed by physicists like John Archibald Wheeler, suggests that information is the most fundamental thing in the universe. Wheeler famously said that it from bit, meaning that everything in the universe, from particles to galaxies, can be understood as a product of bits of information. The idea of the universe as an information processing system is supported by the holographic principle, which suggests that the entire three-dimensional universe we experience is actually a projection from a two-dimensional surface, like a hologram. According to this principle, information is not stored in the bulk of the universe, but encoded on the boundary of the universe itself. This would mean that the information underlying the physical reality we observe is fundamental and transcends space and time. In this view, the universe operates like a giant computer, processing information through its various physical systems. The laws of physics, the fundamental forces, particles, and interactions are simply the rules of the information that governs reality. The concept of information allows us to bridge the gap between the physical and the immaterial, between matter and consciousness, suggesting that everything in the universe is connected through a network of data that underlies all existence. This framework brings us closer to the possibility that consciousness itself is a form of information, an information processing system embedded within the greater informational structure of the universe. If consciousness is indeed information, then it might not be bound to the brain or the body, but could persist in some form beyond physical death. The possibility of persistence. Beyond death, if consciousness is at its core a form of information, then it raises the possibility that consciousness could transcend the physical body. Just as data is stored on a computer, encoded in a series of ones and zeros, what if consciousness is similarly encoded in an informational pattern, one that could, in theory, persist beyond the death of the brain and the body? This idea leads us to an exciting frontier in both physics and philosophy. Could consciousness survive death as an informational pattern? If the essence of who we are, our thoughts, our memories, our sense of self is essentially information, then when the body dies, could that information be preserved, transferred, or even reconstructed in some other form? Could the consciousness itself continue on not as a soul, but as a pattern of information that persists beyond the death of the brain? This possibility aligns with the idea of digital immortality or mind uploading, which proposes that if we could somehow map the informational structure of the brain, we might be able to preserve and transfer consciousness into a computer system or even another physical form. While the technology to achieve this remains far from reality, the idea that information can be preserved beyond the brain opens up intriguing philosophical questions about the persistence of consciousness after death. Materialism versus information-based universe. The contrast between materialism and the idea of a universe governed by information is profound. On one side, we have the traditional materialist view, which sees consciousness as the result of physical processes in the brain. In this view, consciousness is an emergent property of neural activity and can only exist within the physical realm. When the body dies, consciousness ceases to exist. There is no persistence beyond the physical world. On the other side, we have the emerging idea that the universe is a giant information processing system, where information is the most fundamental element of reality. In this view, consciousness is not confined to the brain or the body, but is an informational process that could transcend physical death, existing beyond the body in a form that we don't yet understand. This stark contrast challenges our traditional understanding of life and death, asking whether consciousness is an emergent property of physical processes or whether it is something more fundamental, something that exists independently of the body, encoded as information in the fabric of the universe itself. Information as the key to the universe and consciousness. As we continue to explore the role of information in the universe, we move closer to understanding the very nature of consciousness itself. Whether we view the universe as an information processing system or a place where consciousness persists beyond the body, the idea that everything from the laws of physics to the essence of who we are is rooted in information opens up radical possibilities. If consciousness is information, then it may not be confined to the brain, and it could survive death, continuing to exist in some form beyond the physical world. The concept of information as the currency of the universe offers a new way to think about life, death, and the very fabric of reality itself. In the end, it may be that information, not matter, is the true foundation of all existence and consciousness. Like everything else, is simply a reflection of the deeper patterns and data that underlie the universe. Can information be destroyed? What if the very essence of who we are, the thoughts we think, the memories we hold, the experiences that shape us, cannot truly be destroyed? What if, rather than vanishing when the body dies, the information that constitutes our consciousness simply transforms, continuing to exist in some form beyond the physical realm? Could it be that just like energy or matter, information is conserved, unable to be erased or annihilated even by the process of death? Throughout the history of science, we've come to understand a profound truth: information cannot be destroyed. This principle is at the heart of many of the laws that govern our universe, from the laws of thermodynamics to the no-hair theorem in black hole physics. In these areas, scientists have discovered that information, no matter how it might seem to vanish, is ultimately preserved, stored, and transformed in ways we are only beginning to understand. But what does this principle mean for consciousness? If our thoughts, our memories, and the very sense of self are made of information, does the conservation of information imply that consciousness, the very core of who we are, might persist beyond physical death? Could it be that while our bodies may perish, the information that constitutes our identity, our mind, and our soul is, in some sense, eternal? This section explores the idea that even in the face of death, the information that makes up a person's consciousness might endure, continuing to exist in a form we cannot yet fully comprehend. Through the principles of information conservation in physics, we begin to ask, could death, far from being the end of consciousness, be merely a transition, a transformation of information into a different state? A universal law, the principle of the conservation of information, is one of the most fundamental ideas in modern physics. It suggests that information, the basic building blocks of reality, is not subject to destruction. Instead, it can only be transformed or reorganized. This idea runs deep in several branches of physics, particularly in thermodynamics and black hole physics, both of which have illuminated the profound nature of information. In thermodynamics, the second law states that in a closed system, the entropy or disorder tends to increase over time. However, the law of conservation of energy implies that while energy may spread out and become more dispersed, it does not disappear. This law can be extended to information. While information may become less accessible, it is never truly lost. It is simply encoded in different ways or in different locations, waiting to be recovered or transformed. This principle becomes even more apparent in black hole physics, where the no-hair theorem states that when matter falls into a black hole, its detailed information, the hair that defines its characteristics, is not lost. Instead, it becomes encoded on the black hole's event horizon, preserving the total information about the matter that has fallen in. The paradox arises, however, because information about the matter seems to disappear into the black hole. But recent theories suggest that information in some form is always conserved, even if it takes on a new form we cannot yet detect. The black hole information paradox. The black hole information paradox provides a striking example of how the conservation of information works in extreme conditions. In the 1970s, the physicist Stephen Hawking proposed that black holes could cause information to be lost when matter fell into them. According to his theory, once something entered a black hole, it was destroyed, and all the information about it, the precise details of its state, would be lost forever. This posed a serious problem for the foundations of quantum mechanics, which states that information can never be destroyed. However, recent advancements in theoretical physics suggest that this is not the case. The idea that information is lost in a black hole has been called into question by physicists like Leonard Susskind and Juan Maldacena. They proposed that rather than being destroyed, the information is encoded on the event horizon of the black hole, possibly in the form of holographic data. This theory suggests that the information about everything that falls into a black hole is preserved, though it may be transformed in ways that are beyond our current understanding. The black hole information paradox ultimately illustrates a profound point. Information cannot be destroyed even in the most extreme conditions. It can only be redistributed or transformed into something else. And this idea of the preservation and transformation of information has important implications for the nature of consciousness and death. Could it persist beyond death? If information is truly indestructible, then what does this mean for consciousness, which can be understood as a form of information? If our consciousness is, at its core, a pattern of information encoded in the structure of our brain, could it be that this information, rather than vanishing upon death, simply undergoes a transformation? Could the essence of our consciousness, the thoughts, memories, and identity that define us, be preserved in some way even after the physical body has died? This idea aligns with certain concepts from quantum mechanics and information theory. If consciousness is indeed a form of quantum information, as suggested by theories like OR, orchestrated objective reduction, then it might not be confined to the physical brain. Instead, it could be a non-local informational process that interacts with the quantum field, which might persist beyond the death of the body. In this view, death would not mean the end of consciousness, but rather a transition, a shift in the informational structure that constitutes the mind. If the universe is truly an information processing system, as suggested by theories like John Wheeler's it-from-bit hypothesis, then consciousness could be just another form of universal information. This would imply that consciousness is not tied to a particular location in space-time, but is a global phenomenon woven into the very fabric of the universe. When the body dies, the information that makes up the consciousness might not disappear, but could transform or redistribute into other forms, potentially existing in different states or realities. Death and the transformation of information death, then, might not be the complete annihilation of the self, but the transformation of information. Much like how the entropy of a system is redistributed, the information constituting a person's consciousness could be preserved and even transferred to another form. Whether it is encoded in the quantum field, stored in the fabric of the universe, or transferred to a higher dimensional state, the idea that consciousness persists in some form after death provides a radical shift in how we view the end of life. This transformation does not imply immortality in the traditional sense. It is not the idea of an eternal soul existing in an afterlife. Rather, it suggests that the information that makes us who we are, our memories, our experiences, our sense of self, may not be lost when the body dies. Instead, it could continue to exist, embedded in the universe's informational structure, awaiting further discovery or reconstruction in a different form. Information as permanent was death as annihilation. At the heart of this discussion lies a profound contrast. On one side, we have the view that information is a permanent entity. It cannot be destroyed, only transformed. On the other side, there is the belief that death leads to total annihilation, where consciousness ceases to exist, and all that we are, our thoughts, our experiences, our very selves, disappears forever when the body dies. The materialist view, which holds that consciousness is entirely dependent on the physical brain, often supports the idea of annihilation upon death. Once the brain ceases to function, the argument goes, consciousness ceases to exist. But the concept of information conservation challenges this view, suggesting that even when the body dies, the information that constitutes consciousness may persist, potentially continuing on in some form, whether in the quantum field, as part of a larger informational system, or through holographic principles embedded in the universe itself. The eternal nature of information. As we consider the implications of the conservation of information, we are left with a provocative question. Could the information that constitutes our consciousness persist beyond death? If information is indeed conserved and cannot be destroyed, then the essence of who we are, our consciousness, our identity, and our very experience of being may not simply vanish when the body dies. Instead, it could transform into another form, continuing to exist as part of the greater informational structure of the universe. This opens up the tantalizing possibility that rather than the end of consciousness, death may be merely a transition, the transformation of information from one state to another, allowing us to exist in a different form beyond the confines of the physical body. If information is eternal, then perhaps we too are. A metaphysical framework. What if the soul is not a mystical, ethereal entity, but a non-material form of information, a unique pattern, an intricate set of data that defines who we are, that exists independently of our physical body? What if, rather than being a fixed, immutable essence, the soul is an informational construct, a pattern of energy and data that persists beyond death, continuing to exist in some form after the dissolution of the body? Could the soul, like consciousness, be understood as a quantum informational process, a system of data that transcends the physical realm? For centuries, the soul has been viewed as the eternal, immutable essence of a person, the part of us that survives death, entering into an afterlife or continuing in some spiritual form. From ancient religious beliefs to modern philosophical inquiries, the soul has been an enduring concept in humanity's quest to understand the nature of existence, consciousness, and the possibility of life after death. But what if the soul, rather than being a purely spiritual or religious concept, is something more scientific, more fundamental to the fabric of the universe? What if, instead of being a supernatural essence, the soul is a unique informational pattern, a set of data that defines our identity, our experiences, and our consciousness, and that might persist beyond the physical world, even after our bodies die? In this section, we will explore the idea of the soul as information, a non-material but deeply meaningful structure that could endure beyond the death of the physical body. This concept draws from quantum physics, philosophy, and information theory to propose a new way of thinking about the soul, not as an immaterial essence tied to religious or metaphysical doctrines, but as a pattern of information that exists within the quantum fabric of the universe. The soul as an informational pattern. The idea that the soul could be viewed as a non-material informational pattern challenges traditional metaphysical views of the soul as an eternal and immutable essence. Instead of thinking of the soul as a static entity, something that exists independently and eternally, this perspective suggests that the soul is a dynamic set of information, a pattern that forms and evolves over time. This pattern could be a product of consciousness, experiences, and interactions with the world around us, encoded in the quantum field or information-based structure of the universe. In a sense, the soul becomes a unique informational signature, a collection of data points that define who we are. Just as DNA encodes the information that governs the physical body, the soul could be understood as the code that governs our consciousness, thoughts, and experiences. These informational patterns may not be fixed, but dynamic, constantly evolving and interacting with the environment, perhaps even persisting beyond physical death, in ways we have yet to fully comprehend. This concept draws from the theory of panpsychism, which suggests that consciousness is not localized within the brain, but is an intrinsic property of the universe. If consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality, then it stands to reason that the soul, as an aspect of consciousness, could also be a fundamental feature of the universe, encoded within the very fabric of space-time, information, and energy. In this view, the soul is not merely a product of the brain, but a non-local, informational entity that transcends the physical world. Quantum physics and the soul. The connection between the soul and quantum physics may seem distant, but recent developments in quantum mechanics suggest that the nature of reality itself is deeply tied to information. Quantum theories such as OR, orchestrated objective reduction, proposed by physicists Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, suggest that consciousness may arise from quantum processes in the brain's microtubules, offering a bridge between physical matter and non-material consciousness. In this framework, consciousness is not just an emergent property of neural activity, but a quantum process that interacts with the fabric of the universe. This view posits that consciousness, and by extension, the soul, could be seen as a quantum informational process, encoded in the quantum field, which exists outside the physical constraints of the body. If consciousness is fundamentally quantum in nature, then the soul, as part of consciousness, could transcend the body, continuing to exist beyond physical death. Furthermore, quantum mechanics challenges our traditional understanding of time and space. The principle of non-locality suggests that particles can be instantaneously connected, no matter how far apart they are. This could imply that consciousness, as a quantum phenomenon, might not be confined to the brain or the body, but might exist as part of a larger informational network, linking all consciousnesses across time and space. The soul and the conservation of information. One of the most profound implications of viewing the soul as information is the idea that, like all information, the soul could persist beyond death. In modern physics, information is considered a fundamental aspect of reality, a property that cannot be destroyed but is instead conserved or transformed. This principle, known as the conservation of information, has profound implications for the nature of consciousness and the soul. As we've seen in theories like black hole information, paradox, and the holographic principle, information cannot simply disappear. It can only be encoded or transformed into a different state. If the soul is an informational construct, then it too could be preserved, not destroyed by death, but transformed into another form. Perhaps the pattern of information that makes up a person's consciousness could be encoded in the quantum field or another non-physical medium, continuing its existence even after the physical body has perished. This view challenges traditional beliefs about death as the final annihilation of the soul. Instead of seeing death as an end, we can view it as a transition where the soul's informational pattern is transferred, reorganized, or preserved in a different form. This could imply that consciousness is not an isolated phenomenon tied to the brain, but a universal, non-local process that continues even after the body dies. The soul as eternal versus fleeting, product of consciousness. At the heart of this discussion lies a central contrast: the soul as an eternal, immutable entity versus the soul as a fleeting product of consciousness. The traditional view of the soul, found in many religious and spiritual traditions, sees the soul as a timeless, immortal essence, an entity that exists before birth and continues to exist after death, often entering an afterlife or transcending into some eternal realm. In this view, the soul is immutable, eternal, and separate from the physical world. It is the core of the self, and it does not change or evolve. However, the idea of the soul as an informational pattern presents a different picture. Rather than being an eternal essence, the soul in this framework is seen as a dynamic, evolving pattern, one that is shaped by our experiences, our thoughts, and our interactions with the world. While the soul may persist beyond death, it is not fixed or immutable. Instead, it is a transformative process, one that continues to evolve and interact with the quantum field, even after physical death. This contrast invites us to reconsider our understanding of the soul. Is the soul something that transcends time and space, a permanent entity that survives death in an unchanged form? Or is it something more fluid, more informational, a pattern of data that continues to evolve even after the body ceases to function? The role of information in consciousness. Ultimately, the idea of the soul as information provides a framework that may help bridge the gap between materialism and spirituality. If consciousness and the soul are, at their core, informational processes, then we can begin to understand them in terms of patterns of data complex systems that emerge from the quantum field but are not confined to it. This view allows us to move beyond the rigid boundaries of materialism and dualism, offering a more fluid, interconnected understanding of consciousness and the soul. If the soul is an informational pattern, it may not be confined to the brain or the body. It could exist as part of a larger informational structure, continuing its existence in a form we do not yet understand. The idea that information cannot be destroyed, that it can only be transformed, raises the possibility that the soul, as information, might transcend death, continuing to exist in ways that we are only beginning to comprehend. The soul's persistent pattern. The concept of the soul as information challenges our traditional understanding of death, consciousness, and the nature of the self. If the soul is a unique informational pattern, then it may not be destroyed by death, but could persist, transform, and continue to evolve. This new framework allows us to think of the soul as an informational process embedded within the quantum fabric of the universe, and suggests that the essence of who we are may transcend the physical world. The soul, then, may not be a permanent, immutable entity, but a dynamic, evolving informational pattern continuing to exist in some form beyond the confines of the body and the physical realm. Whether it persists as part of the quantum field, transforms into another state, or is integrated into the larger fabric of reality, the idea of the soul as information offers a new perspective on life, death, and the continuity of consciousness. Window into the infinite. What if the answers to life's deepest questions, the nature of consciousness, the possibility of an afterlife, the persistence of information, lie in the most bizarre and counterintuitive aspects of quantum mechanics? What if the strange behaviors of subatomic particles, such as entanglement and superposition, offer clues not only to the workings of the universe, but to the very nature of consciousness and the possibility that it might survive death? Quantum mechanics. The branch of physics that governs the microscopic world of particles, atoms, and subatomic forces has long fascinated and bewildered scientists. Unlike classical physics, which describes a deterministic world where every effect has a precise cause, quantum mechanics introduces a radical sense of indeterminacy and probability. It is a realm where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, and where the act of observation can fundamentally alter the course of events. But what does all of this have to do with consciousness, that mysterious, intangible quality that makes us aware of ourselves and the world around us? Can quantum physics help explain the hard problem of consciousness, the question of how subjective experience arises from the physical brain? And, more provocatively, could quantum phenomena, like entanglement or superposition, offer a way for consciousness to transcend space-time and survive death? In this section, we explore the quantum realm and its potential implications for understanding the nature of consciousness and the afterlife. We will examine key quantum phenomena like entanglement, superposition, and the observer effect, and suggest how these could provide a new framework for thinking about life, death, and the persistence of information. The weird and wonderful world at its core, quantum mechanics challenges our everyday understanding of reality. Unlike classical physics, which deals with predictable deterministic systems, quantum mechanics operates in a realm where things are not as they seem. Subatomic particles do not have fixed positions or velocities until they are measured. Instead, they exist in a probabilistic cloud of possibilities, where their exact state is only determined at the moment of observation. One of the most famous demonstrations of this strange behavior is the double-slit experiment. When particles, such as electrons, are shot through two slits in a barrier, they behave like waves, creating an interference pattern on the other side. But when we observe which slit the particles go through, they behave like particles, creating no interference pattern. The mere act of observation alters the outcome, suggesting that the state of a quantum system is not determined until it is measured. This phenomenon, known as the observer effect, raises profound questions not only about the nature of reality, but about the role of consciousness itself. If the state of a quantum system is determined by the act of observation, does this suggest that consciousness is central to the very fabric of reality? Could our awareness, our conscious perception of the world, play a role in determining how reality unfolds, not just in our minds, but in the universe itself? A glimpse of non-locality. Another mind-bending concept in quantum mechanics is quantum entanglement. When two particles become entangled, their properties become linked, so that the state of one particle is immediately correlated with the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. This connection happens instantaneously, even if the particles are separated by vast distances, defying the classical notion that information cannot travel faster than the speed of light. Entanglement suggests a kind of non-locality, a connection that transcends the limitations of space and time. In the quantum realm, particles are not confined to the same space-time continuum as we are. Instead, they are interconnected in a way that suggests that information is not limited by distance, and that everything in the universe might be part of a vast, interconnected web. Could consciousness itself be entangled with the universe in a similar way? If the mind is non-local, as quantum mechanics suggests, then perhaps consciousness can transcend the physical confines of the brain and the body. Just as entangled particles influence each other across vast distances, could consciousness be entangled with the fabric of reality, able to connect with other states of being, even across the boundary of death? This idea opens up the possibility that consciousness, like quantum entanglement, may be non-local, existing beyond space and time, and potentially surviving death in some form. The many worlds of consciousness. Another quantum phenomenon that might shed light on the nature of consciousness is superposition. In the quantum world, particles can exist in multiple states at once, a concept known as superposition. For example, a particle can be in two places at the same time or spinning in two directions simultaneously. Only when the particle is measured does it collapse into one definite state. This idea of multiple possibilities existing simultaneously leads to the idea of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. According to this interpretation, every time a quantum decision is made, every measurement, every choice, the universe splits, creating multiple parallel universes, each one representing a different outcome. In this view, there is no single reality but an infinite number of parallel realities, each one existing simultaneously. Could consciousness operate in a similar way? Could the act of perception, the conscious decision to observe a particular state, cause the universe to split into multiple possibilities, with different versions of ourselves existing in parallel worlds? If consciousness is not tied to a single timeline but exists across multiple realities, could it persist beyond death, continuing its existence in an alternate timeline or reality? Could the multiple versions of our consciousness, each existing in a different universe, be part of an ongoing process, continuing after physical death? Consciousness as a creator of reality. The observer effect suggests that consciousness plays a crucial role in shaping the fabric of reality. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in a state of probability until they are observed, at which point they collapse into a definite state. This seems to imply that consciousness is not a passive observer of the universe, but an active participant in creating it, shaping the outcome of events through the act of observation. Could this idea be extended to our understanding of death? If consciousness is an active participant in shaping reality, could it transcend the physical body when the body dies, continuing to shape new realities or timelines? Could the information that constitutes our consciousness, our thoughts, memories, and self-awareness persist in some way, continuing to influence the fabric of the universe beyond the limitations of time and space? In this view, death is not the end of consciousness, but a transition, the moment when consciousness shifts from one state of being to another, much like how a quantum system shifts between states of superposition. If consciousness is non-local, if it is entangled with the fabric of the universe, then perhaps death is not the final curtain, but a doorway to a new state of being, one that exists beyond the physical world. Classical determinism versus quantum indeterminacy. Contrast between classical determinism and quantum indeterminacy is profound. In classical physics, the universe is governed by fixed laws, cause and effect are predictable, and events unfold according to a rigid, deterministic structure. But quantum mechanics shatters this notion. In the quantum realm, there is indeterminacy, the idea that events are not set in stone, but exist in a state of probability until observed. This indeterminacy introduces a new possibility for consciousness. In a deterministic universe, consciousness would be a byproduct of the brain's physical processes, a final product of the predictable interactions of neurons and chemicals. But in a quantum universe where outcomes are not determined until they are observed, consciousness might be a more dynamic, fluid phenomenon, one that can transcend physical limits and interact with the universe in ways we cannot yet fully understand. If consciousness is subject to quantum indeterminacy, could it transcend space-time, surviving death and existing in alternate realities, timelines, or states of being? Quantum mechanics and the afterlife. As we stand at the intersection of quantum mechanics and the mysteries of consciousness, we begin to glimpse a profound possibility. That consciousness, rather than being a mere emergent property of the brain, is a non-local, quantum informational process that may transcend the physical world. The phenomena of entanglement, superposition, and the observer effect all suggest that reality is not as fixed as we once thought, that it is a vast web of possibilities where consciousness plays an active role in shaping the outcome. If consciousness is indeed a quantum phenomenon, then it may not be confined to the brain or the body. Rather, it could be part of the quantum fabric of reality itself, able to transcend space-time and survive death. The concept of the afterlife in this view is not about an ethereal soul floating in an afterlife, but about the persistence of information, the very essence of who we are continuing in a form that we cannot yet fully comprehend. In the quantum world, indeterminacy reigns. And perhaps that indeterminacy is the very key to understanding how consciousness can persist beyond death. Quantum mechanics opens the door to infinite possibilities, and if consciousness is part of that infinite web, then perhaps the greatest mystery of all is not whether we die, but how consciousness transforms, evolving into new forms, timelines, and realities that extend far beyond the physical body. Glimpses beyond the veil. Imagine being on the precipice between life and death, your heart slowing, your body shutting down, and yet somehow you feel alive. Suddenly you find yourself in an ethereal space, one that is peaceful, bathed in light, or perhaps filled with a sense of profound unity. You may encounter loved ones who have passed, or feel an overwhelming sense of peace and transcendence. Is this a hallucination, a chemical reaction brought on by the brain's shutdown? Or is it something more? Could it be that in these moments of near death, we are not simply fading away, but glimpsing another realm, one where consciousness survives the physical body? The phenomenon of near-death experiences, NDEs, has intrigued scientists, doctors, and spiritual seekers alike for decades. For those who have had them, NDEs are often described as vivid, transformative, and deeply meaningful events, leaving individuals with a sense of connection to the beyond and an altered view of life. But what do these experiences really mean? Do they offer tangible evidence that consciousness persists beyond the body? Or are they merely the product of neurochemical activity, a final flicker of the brain before it ceases to function? This section will explore the mysterious world of near-death experiences, examining both the scientific and spiritual interpretations of these phenomena, and asking the fundamental question, could NDEs be more than just hallucinations? Could they offer us a glimpse beyond the veil of death into a state where consciousness survives the physical death of the body? A vivid journey beyond the body and near-death experience is typically reported by individuals who have been clinically dead. Their heart has stopped, their breathing has ceased, and their brain activity has flatlined, only to be revived later. Despite the cessation of bodily functions, many individuals report experiencing vivid, life-altering visions or encounters during this time. These experiences often share common elements, including a sense of detachment from the body, often accompanied by feelings of floating or observing the scene from above. A journey through a tunnel toward a bright light, often described as a welcoming or peaceful presence, encounters with deceased loved ones or spiritual figures who may offer guidance or reassurance. A feeling of peace and unity, with some individuals reporting a profound sense of love or connection with the universe. A life review. where individuals experience a rapid replay of key moments from their lives, sometimes feeling as though they are reliving their actions from others' perspectives. For many, these experiences are not only vivid but also deeply transformative. People who have had NDEs often report a new perspective on life, characterized by a diminished fear of death, a greater appreciation for life, and a sense of spiritual awakening. But what does this tell us about the nature of consciousness? Are these experiences the result of brain activity, hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, or could they be a glimpse into something far more profound, a window into the existence of the soul or consciousness beyond the body, neurochemical or psychological phenomenon? From a scientific perspective, NDEs have been traditionally viewed as a neurological phenomenon, a product of the brain's final moments of activity as it shuts down. Researchers have proposed a variety of explanations for the vividness of these experiences, most of which are rooted in biological processes. Oxygen deprivation. One of the most common explanations is that when the brain is deprived of oxygen, it begins to malfunction, potentially triggering vivid hallucinations, distorted perceptions, or feelings of detachment. The tunnel vision often reported could be a result of low oxygen levels affecting the brain's visual processing centers. Endorphin release. During extreme stress, the body releases endorphins, natural painkillers that could explain the feelings of peace, euphoria, or love, often reported by NDE experiencers. The sense of unity or oneness with the universe might be attributed to a flood of neurochemicals that alter perception and emotional response. Temporal lobe activity. The temporal lobes of the brain are involved in processing emotions, memory, and spiritual experiences. Some neuroscientists suggest that electrical stimulation of the temporal lobes or a malfunction in this area could lead to vivid, spiritual-like experiences during periods of extreme stress or trauma. Psychological mechanisms. Another explanation lies in the psychological and cognitive responses to death. Some argue that NDEs may be a coping mechanism, a way for the brain to create a comforting narrative when faced with the threat of mortality. The feeling of peace or encounters with deceased loved ones could be a mental defense against the fear of death. While these scientific explanations offer plausible insights into the physiological and psychological mechanisms behind NDEs, they do not fully account for the consistency and universality of the experiences. People from different cultures, backgrounds, and religious beliefs often report similar experiences, leading some to wonder, could there be something beyond the physical brain at play? A glimpse of the afterlife. For many, the most compelling interpretation of NDEs is spiritual in nature. Those who have experienced NDEs often describe them as a profound, life-changing event, one that leaves them convinced of the existence of an afterlife or a continuation of consciousness beyond death. In fact, some individuals who have undergone NDEs claim to have communicated with deceased relatives, spiritual beings, or even religious figures. These experiences seem to offer not just a comforting narrative of what happens after death, but a direct encounter with what may lie beyond the veil. Spiritual interpretations of NDEs suggest that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but rather a non-material essence that transcends the physical body. In this view, NDEs are seen as glimpses into the spiritual realm, where the soul temporarily departs from the body and experiences a form of continuity beyond death. Whether it's an encounter with a light being, a journey through a cosmic tunnel, or a reunion with loved ones, these experiences offer compelling evidence for many that consciousness persists beyond the physical death of the body. A window into the soul. One of the most profound elements of many NDEs is the life review, the experience of reliving key moments from one's life, often with a sense of profound insight or understanding. In some accounts, individuals report seeing their actions from the perspective of others, feeling the impact of their decisions on the lives of those around them. This life review could suggest that consciousness is more than just a temporary byproduct of brain activity. It may point to an ongoing process, an informational record of a person's life that persists beyond death. If consciousness is information, as suggested in earlier sections, then this life review could be a manifestation of the unfolding of information, a chance for the individual to understand how their life and actions fit into a larger cosmic context, NDEs as hallucinations, as proof of life. After death, at the heart of the NDE debate is a fundamental contrast. Are NDEs simply hallucinations or neurochemical reactions, products of a brain under extreme stress, or do they offer proof that consciousness survives the physical death of the body? Skeptics argue that NDEs are simply hallucinations or psychological projections caused by the brain's reaction to trauma. From this perspective, the vivid visions of light, loved ones, or peaceful landscapes are merely the brain's attempt to process the trauma of death or to offer comfort in a moment of extreme fear. On the other hand, those who have experienced NDEs often describe them as profound, life-altering events, experiences that cannot be easily dismissed as simple hallucinations. Many report feelings of peace and unity that are far beyond ordinary psychological experiences. The consistency of the phenomena across cultures, the vividness of the experiences, and the profound spiritual transformations that often follow lead many to believe that NDEs are glimpses into a reality beyond the physical world, a reality where consciousness continues to exist after death. Could NDEs offer evidence of life after death? The mystery of near-death experiences remains one of the most intriguing and debated phenomena in the study of consciousness. Whether we view them as hallucinations brought on by brain chemistry or as genuine glimpses into the afterlife, NDEs offer a unique perspective on the relationship between consciousness, the physical body, and the possibility of an afterlife. While science may offer explanations grounded in neurochemistry and psychology, NDEs continue to provoke a sense of wonder and mystery, suggesting that consciousness may be far more dynamic, universal, and resilient than we have ever imagined. Could they be a glimpse beyond the veil, a proof that consciousness persists even after the body ceases to function? Or are they simply biological illusions, a final flicker of the brain before death? In the end, near-death experiences may offer us more than just a glimpse of the afterlife. They may point us toward a deeper understanding of the nature of consciousness itself, suggesting that it is not a fleeting, ephemeral product of the brain, but a fundamental, enduring aspect of existence, perhaps even transcending death. The holographic universe is reality, just a projection? What if the universe you see around you, the stars, the planets, the very fabric of space-time, is not as solid and real as we've always believed? What if reality itself is simply a projection? An illusion like a hologram encoded on a distant two-dimensional surface? And if that's true, what does it say about the nature of consciousness and the soul? Could consciousness itself be a kind of holographic projection, a complex pattern of information that exists beyond the physical body? And could death be nothing more than a shift in the informational projection of who we are? For centuries, philosophers and scientists have debated the true nature of reality. Is it a tangible physical world governed by the laws of physics and matter? Or is reality something far more elusive, an illusion, a projection of deeper informational structures? In recent years, a theory has emerged that challenges our classical understanding of the universe, the holographic principle, which suggests that the entire universe, everything we experience as physical reality, might be nothing more than a three-dimensional projection of information encoded on a two-dimensional surface. This mind-bending idea not only challenges our perception of reality, but raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and the soul. Could our consciousness be a holographic projection too? Could the information that constitutes our sense of self, our memories, our thoughts, our awareness, be encoded in a similar way? And if so, does that mean that death is not an end but merely a shift in the projection, a transformation of the informational structure that makes up our being? In this section, we will explore the holographic universe theory, the possibility that reality itself is a projection of information, and how this might reshape our understanding of consciousness and the afterlife. We will examine the implications of this theory for the nature of the soul and consciousness, and how it might suggest that death is not the end of consciousness, but simply a shift in its informational projection. The holographic principle, reality, as a projection of information. The holographic principle was first proposed by physicist Juan Maldacena in the late 1990s as part of his work on string theory and black hole physics. The principle suggests that all the information contained within a three-dimensional volume of space, like the universe, can actually be encoded on a two-dimensional surface, much like how a hologram is a three-dimensional image encoded on a two-dimensional surface. In this view, the universe we perceive as being three-dimensional with depth, width, and height is, in fact, a projection of information from a two-dimensional surface that exists at the boundary of the universe. This idea was inspired by the behavior of black holes, which suggest that the information about everything that falls into a black hole is not lost, as was once believed, but rather encoded on the surface of the event horizon, the boundary of the black hole. The holographic principle proposes that the entire universe operates on similar principles, that space-time itself is a kind of projection, and that all the information in the universe can be encoded on a two-dimensional surface, perhaps at the edge of the universe. This theory suggests that the physical world we experience is not the fundamental reality, but rather a projection of deeper, more fundamental informational structures that exist beyond our perception. Consciousness as a holographic projection. What does the holographic principle mean for consciousness? Could it be that consciousness itself, the very awareness we experience, the feeling of being alive, the thoughts and memories that define us, is also a form of projection? In this view, consciousness is not confined to the brain or the body, but is a pattern of information encoded and projected onto the quantum field of the universe, much like how a hologram is projected from a two-dimensional surface. If consciousness is indeed a holographic projection, then it suggests that the self, the soul, the mind, and the body are all part of a larger informational system that transcends space and time. Just as the holographic principle suggests that the universe is a projection of a two-dimensional surface, our individual consciousness might be a projection of information encoded in a deeper quantum reality. This implies that consciousness is not a localized phenomenon tied to the brain or body, but is part of a universal, non-local informational field. The holographic soul. Could information be eternal? If the soul is also a projection of information, then it raises an intriguing question. Can the soul survive death? If consciousness is simply an informational pattern, could it persist beyond the death of the physical body, perhaps continuing as an informational imprint on the fabric of the universe? Just as a hologram is a projection of information that can be reconstructed from the surface, could the soul be a form of informational pattern that continues to exist beyond the physical body even after death? The idea that the soul is an informational construct aligns with theories of quantum consciousness and panpsychism, which suggest that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, not confined to the brain or body. If the soul is encoded in the quantum field as an informational pattern, it might not be destroyed by physical death. Instead, it could transform or shift into a different state, just as the holographic image can be projected in various forms. This concept suggests that death is not the end of consciousness, but a transition, a shift in the way consciousness is projected and encoded in the universe. Just as a hologram is not confined to a single image but can be reconstructed in different ways, perhaps the soul, as an informational pattern, could continue to exist, encoded in a different state of being. The universe as an informational illusion. One of the most provocative implications of the holographic universe theory is that the entire physical universe we perceive may be an illusion, a projection of deeper informational structures. The solid matter, the laws of physics, the very fabric of space-time, all might be projections of information encoded at the boundary of the universe, much like a hologram is a three-dimensional illusion created from two-dimensional data. In this view, the physical world is not the ultimate reality. Instead, it is an informational construct, a projection that we perceive through our senses. The idea that reality itself is an illusion suggests that everything we experience, from the smallest particles to the vast expanse of galaxies, is a product of deeper informational processes that govern the quantum field. The perception of solid matter, space, and time may simply be an illusion created by the way information is processed and projected onto our consciousness. If the physical world is a projection, then the question arises, what happens when the projection ends, when the body dies and the physical world disappears? Could this be a shift in the informational projection of the self, where the soul or consciousness moves from one state of projection to another? In this sense, death might not be a destruction of consciousness, but a shift in the informational state of being. Classical reality versus holographic reality. The contrast between classical reality and the idea of a holographic reality is profound. In classical physics, the universe is seen as a physical system governed by deterministic laws. Matter is solid, space is three-dimensional, and time moves in one direction. In this view, consciousness is a byproduct of the brain and body, confined to the physical realm. However, in the holographic universe theory, the universe is not a physical reality but a projection of information. Consciousness, in this framework, is not limited to the brain or the body, but is an informational process that is part of a larger quantum system. If consciousness is a holographic projection, then it could transcend physical limitations, existing in a non-local field that is not bound by space and time. This shift in perspective suggests that the universe we perceive is not the ultimate reality, but an illusion, a holographic projection that we experience through our senses. Death, in this context, would not mean the end of existence, but a transition from one informational state to another. It is not the destruction of the self, but a reorganization of the informational patterns that make up the soul and consciousness. Death. As a shift in the informational projection, the holographic universe theory offers a radical new perspective on the nature of reality and consciousness. If the universe is an informational projection, then consciousness too may be a form of information encoded in the quantum field and capable of surviving beyond the physical body. Death, rather than being the end of consciousness, may simply be a shift in the way consciousness is projected and encoded in the universe. In this view, the soul is not a static, eternal entity, but a dynamic informational pattern that continues to evolve even beyond death. Just as the holographic image is a projection of two-dimensional data, the soul could be a projection of higher dimensional information, a pattern that endures, shifts, and transforms, continuing its existence beyond the physical realm. The holographic universe theory opens up new possibilities for understanding the nature of consciousness and the afterlife. It challenges our traditional views of reality, suggesting that what we perceive as solid, physical matter may be nothing more than a projection of deeper, more profound informational structures. And if consciousness is part of this cosmic projection, then it may not be confined to the body, but might persist, evolve, and continue beyond the veil of death. The digital afterlife. Can our minds be uploaded? What if the key to immortality isn't found in an afterlife, but in a digital realm? What if, in the future, we could upload our consciousness, our thoughts, memories, emotions, and experiences into a digital format, allowing us to exist in a form that transcends the limitations of the physical body? Could the very essence of who we are, our mind, our soul, our identity, be transformed into data surviving death in a computational form? The idea of uploading the human mind into a machine, often referred to as mind uploading or whole brain emulation, has captivated the imagination of scientists, futurists, and philosophers for decades. It suggests that in the future, we might be able to create a digital version of our consciousness, effectively allowing us to live forever in the virtual realm. If our consciousness can be transferred into a computer, could we achieve a form of immortality, one where our mind continues to function independently of our biological body? In this section, we will explore the concept of mind uploading, both from a technological and a philosophical perspective. We'll examine the feasibility of such a radical concept, the challenges that stand in the way of its realization, and the profound questions it raises about the nature of consciousness, identity, and the soul. Could the soul, the essence of who we are, be transferred as information, allowing us to survive death in a digital form? Or is consciousness fundamentally tied to the biological body, making such a transfer impossible? The concept of mind uploading. The promise of digital immortality mind uploading, also known as whole brain emulation, is the hypothetical process of transferring a person's consciousness into a digital format. The idea is that by mapping the entire structure and function of the brain, the neurons, synapses, and their connections, we could recreate the mind in a computer system, essentially creating a digital replica of the person. This digital mind could then exist within a machine, a virtual world, or a network, continuing to think, experience, and evolve long after the physical body has died. The promise of mind uploading is deeply tied to the desire for immortality. In theory, if we could preserve our consciousness in a digital format, we might be able to bypass the biological constraints of aging, disease, and death. Instead of the mind being bound to the body, it would be freed from its physical limitations, able to continue existing indefinitely in the digital realm. This could offer an alternative to traditional concepts of an afterlife, one that is rooted in technology rather than spirituality. But is mind uploading truly possible? Could we ever develop the technology to scan and replicate the human brain at such a detailed level that we could effectively download a person's mind into a machine? And if we could, would the resulting digital mind truly be the same person with the same consciousness, or would it merely be a sophisticated simulation of their thoughts and memories? Technological feasibility, mapping the brain and transferring consciousness. The first major hurdle in mind uploading is the sheer complexity of the human brain. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each of which is connected to thousands of other neurons by synapses, forming an immensely intricate network of information processing. For mind uploading to work, we would need to map this network in exquisite detail, not just the physical structure of the brain, but also the functional activity of the neurons and the dynamic patterns of information they process. Recent advancements in neuroscience and neuroimaging have brought us closer to understanding the brain's structure and function. Techniques like fMRI and optogenetics allow scientists to observe brain activity in real time, and new methods for brain mapping are revealing the complex interactions between different regions of the brain. But even with these advances, we are still a long way from being able to digitally replicate the brain's structure and function with the level of precision required for mind uploading. Moreover, current neurotechnology is not nearly advanced enough to simulate the full range of conscious experience that a human being has. While we can model simple neural circuits, creating a digital version of the entire brain with its vast complexity is an immense challenge. The sheer amount of data required to accurately simulate a human mind is mind-boggling, and the processing power needed to maintain that simulation in real time would be beyond the capabilities of today's computers. However, some futurists, such as Ray Kurzweil, believe that advances in nanotechnology, neural interfaces, and quantum computing may eventually allow us to overcome these challenges. Kurzweil, in particular, predicts that the convergence of these technologies could lead to the singularity, a point at which human consciousness could be uploaded into digital form, allowing for a kind of digital immortality. Consciousness as biological versus computational. The question at the heart of mind uploading is consciousness inherently biological, tied to the complex physical processes of the brain, or is it computational, something that could be replicated in a machine? On one hand, proponents of mind uploading argue that consciousness is simply the result of information processing, that the brain, as a highly complex computational system, produces consciousness through its network of neurons. From this perspective, if we could recreate the information structure of the brain, we could effectively transfer consciousness to a digital system. The resulting digital mind would be just as conscious, self-aware, and sentient as the biological version. On the other hand, critics of mind uploading argue that consciousness is not merely a computational process, but a biological phenomenon that is inseparable from the brain's organic structure. According to this view, consciousness arises from the specific patterns of interaction between neurons and the brain's biochemical environment, and no machine, no matter how sophisticated, could ever replicate the full richness of human experience. In this view, uploading consciousness would not create a true continuation of the individual's self, but merely a simulation of their thoughts and memories, a copy that lacks the authenticity of the original consciousness. This debate touches on some of the most fundamental questions about the nature of identity and selfhood. If a mind is uploaded into a computer, does it continue to be the same person, or does it become a new entity with its own separate existence? Could the soul, that non-material essence that many believe is the core of the self, be transferred in the same way, or is it something that cannot be encoded as information? Philosophical implications. The soul, the self, and immortality, the concept of mind uploading, raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of the soul and immortality. If consciousness can be uploaded to a digital format, what does that mean for the concept of the soul? Is the soul something that can be transferred as information, or is it a unique, non-material essence that cannot be replicated or stored in a machine? Some argue that the soul, as the eternal, non-material essence of a person, is something that transcends the body and the mind. From this perspective, mind uploading might allow for a kind of continuation of the mind's activities, but not the soul. The uploaded mind would be a replica, a copy of the original person's consciousness, but the soul, the true essence of who they are, would not survive the transition. Others believe that if consciousness is simply an informational pattern, then the soul, like the mind, could be transferred as data. In this view, the uploaded mind is not a copy, but the continuation of the original self, existing in a new form. The digital soul would be the same soul, just encoded in a different medium, continuing to experience existence beyond the biological body. The idea of digital immortality challenges traditional views of life and death. If we can upload our minds, can we truly achieve immortality? Does uploading consciousness allow us to live forever? Or does it merely create a new entity, a shadow of the self that lacks the authenticity and continuity of life? The future of consciousness and the digital afterlife mind uploading presents a tantalizing possibility that consciousness and potentially the soul could be transferred to a digital format, allowing for a form of immortality beyond the physical body. The technological challenges are immense, but the philosophical implications are even more profound. If consciousness is information, then perhaps it can be encoded, preserved, and transferred to a machine, allowing us to survive death in a digital realm. Whether or not mind uploading is ever possible, it raises fundamental questions about what it means to be human and what it means to be alive. Is consciousness tied to the body, or can it exist in a computational form beyond the physical realm? Is the soul an informational entity, or is it something more elusive beyond the reach of technology? As we look toward the future, the concept of the digital afterlife challenges us to reconsider the nature of life, death, and immortality, offering a vision of existence where consciousness can transcend the limitations of the biological body and continue to evolve, explore, and grow in a digital form. The role of memory, a key to the soul's continuity. What if the essence of who we are, our memories, our experiences, and the information that makes us uniquely ourselves is not just stored in the brain, but exists as an eternal thread, connecting us across time and even beyond death? What if memory, rather than being a fleeting byproduct of neural activity, is the key to our consciousness, the informational thread that links our present self to our past self, and perhaps even to our future selves? Memory is central to our experience of identity. It is the repository of who we are, shaping our thoughts, our actions, and our perception of the world. Without memory, we would be like a ship lost at sea with no sense of direction, no understanding of where we've come from or where we're going. But what if memory is more than just a biological function? What if it is an informational pattern that transcends the physical brain? Could memories survive beyond the body? And if consciousness is, at its core, information, can memory act as the link between life and death, the continuity of identity that bridges the physical world and the afterlife? This section explores the profound role that memory plays in our understanding of consciousness and identity, and asks whether memory could be the key to the continuity of the soul, persisting beyond death, continuing to connect us to a deeper, eternal sense of self. Could the information that constitutes our memories live on even after the brain and body cease to function? Or is memory confined to the brain, a neural function that dies with the body? Memory as the foundation of identity, tat. Its core memory is what makes us who we are. It allows us to recall our past experiences, reflect on our emotions, and learn from the world around us. It is the repository of our personal identity, a record of everything we have seen, heard, felt, and experienced. Through memory, we are able to make sense of who we are in the context of the world we inhabit. Without memory, we would have no concept of selfhood. We would be disconnected from our past, unable to retain any sense of continuity between who we were and who we are. Our memories give us a sense of identity and stability, allowing us to feel like a coherent, persistent self that moves through time. They are the anchor that holds us in the stream of life. Memory is often seen as a purely biological function tied to the neural circuits of the brain. The hippocampus, a small structure in the brain, is known to be crucial for forming new memories, while other areas of the brain store and process different types of information. From this perspective, memory is viewed as a neural function produced by the activity of neurons and the synaptic connections that form between them. But what if memory is more than just a biological process? What if it is not just a chemical or electrical pattern in the brain, but a deeper, more fundamental informational structure, one that is encoded in the very fabric of the universe, extending beyond the confines of the brain? Could memory be a connection to something eternal, something that persists beyond the body and survives the death of the physical brain? Memory as an informational thread. If consciousness is a form of information, then memory might be the repository of that information, the place where the patterns that define our identity are stored. In this view, memory is not merely a biological function of the brain, but an informational thread that connects us to something beyond the physical world. It might be that our memories are not confined to the brain at all, but are part of a larger informational field, a quantum structure, or a holographic pattern that exists in the very fabric of the universe. In quantum mechanics, there is a concept known as information conservation. This principle states that information cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed or redistributed. This suggests that the information contained in our memories, the data that makes up our thoughts, emotions, and experiences, might be preserved in some form, even after the body dies. If information is eternal, then perhaps the continuity of identity, the sense of self, might persist beyond the physical death of the body, encoded in the informational structure of the universe. This perspective allows us to view memory not just as a process that takes place within the brain, but as an eternal or universal pattern that can transcend the body. Just as a hologram can be projected from two-dimensional information to create a three-dimensional image, could our memories be projected from an informational source that exists outside the body? Could the soul, the self, be a form of informational data that persists encoded and preserved even after the death of the body? Memory and the continuity of identity. One of the most profound questions in philosophy is how identity is maintained over time. How do we remain the same person despite the constant changes in our bodies, our minds, and our experiences? Philosophers have long debated whether identity is continuous, whether there is a constant, unchanging self that persists through time, or whether we are always becoming something new with no true continuity between who we were and who we are. Memory plays a crucial role in this question. Without memory, there would be no sense of continuity, no way to connect our past selves with our present selves. We rely on our memories to maintain a sense of who we are, to see ourselves as a consistent person with a past, a present, and a future. But if memory is not simply a biological function, but a form of information, then perhaps identity is not tied to the physical body at all. Perhaps the self is not defined by the brain's activity, but by the informational patterns that make up our memories, our consciousness, and our very sense of existence. In this framework, death might not be the end of the self, but a transition, a shift in the informational pattern that constitutes our identity. If memories are encoded as information, and that information is preserved, then the continuity of identity might persist beyond death, transitioning into a new form or state. Rather than being lost to oblivion, the information that makes up our self could continue, potentially in another dimension, in the quantum field, or in some form of afterlife. Philosophical implications. Memory and the soul. If memory is the key to the continuity of identity, then it raises significant philosophical questions about the soul. Is the soul something that exists independently of the body? Or is it a form of information, a pattern that persists beyond the body? Could death be nothing more than a shift in the informational structure of the soul, where the information that constitutes our being continues to exist in a different state, a different dimension, or a new form of existence? For many, the soul is seen as an eternal, unchanging essence, something that exists before birth and continues after death. In traditional religious views, the soul is often thought to transcend the body, surviving death and entering an afterlife. But if the soul is informational, then its existence might not be bound by time or space. Instead, it could be part of a larger informational system, a pattern of data that survives death and continues to exist in some form. This idea aligns with panpsychism, the belief that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but is instead a fundamental property of the universe. If consciousness is eternal, And if memory is the key to maintaining continuity, then perhaps the soul is encoded in the quantum fabric of reality itself, transcending the body and surviving death. Memory as a neural function versus memory as an informational thread. The contrast between memory as a neural function and memory as an informational thread is profound. On one side, we have the traditional view that memory is a biological process confined to the brain's neural circuits. In this view, when the brain ceases to function, memory, and with it, consciousness, is lost forever. Death marks the end of memory and identity. On the other side, we have the view that memory is not merely a biological function, but a non-material, informational process that exists outside the brain. In this view, memory is part of the continuity of identity, encoded in the quantum field or some larger informational structure, and it can survive death. Memory, as an informational thread, could transcend the physical brain, continuing to exist, even when the body is no longer alive. This contrast raises deep questions about the nature of the self. Is the self tied to the body and the brain, or is it an informational pattern that exists independently of the physical world? Could death be the transformation of the self rather than its end? Could the soul be a pattern of information, a dynamic, evolving thread that continues to exist beyond the limitations of the body? Memory and the continuity of the soul. As we contemplate the role of memory in the continuity of identity, we are drawn to a profound realization. Memory may not be just a fleeting biological process, but the key to the eternal nature of the self. If memory is an informational thread, then it could be the link that connects us not only to our past, but to something greater, something eternal, something that survives the body and transcends death. In this view, death is not the end of consciousness, but a shift in the informational pattern of the self. The memories, the thoughts, the experiences that make us who we are could continue to exist beyond the body, encoded in a form that we cannot yet fully understand. Memory, then, might be the key to the continuity of the soul, ensuring that we live on even after the physical body has faded away. The universe as a mind. As we draw this journey to a close, we are left with more questions than answers, more mysteries than certainties. We have explored the nature of consciousness from the mind's potential as a quantum phenomenon to the possibility of it transcending the physical world. We have considered whether our soul is merely a biological product of our brain, or if it is something more, an informational pattern that transcends time and space, continuing even after death. We've delved into quantum mechanics, the holographic universe, and theories of universal consciousness, all offering different perspectives on what might happen to our consciousness when our physical bodies cease to function. At the heart of these inquiries lies a profound and ancient question: can information survive death? If consciousness is a form of information, and if this information can be preserved, transformed, or transferred, then might it be possible for our souls to persist beyond the death of our physical bodies? Or, in the end, is death the ultimate end, the final extinction of the self, with no trace left behind? These are not just questions for scientists and philosophers to ponder. They are questions that touch the very core of our human experience. We live our lives with a sense of self, with a continuous narrative of identity, and we wonder whether that identity will persist, whether the very soul that makes us who we are will continue to exist, even after we have taken our last breath. As we stand at the edge of the unknown, we must ask ourselves, what does it mean to be alive, and what does it mean to die? Is death truly the end, or is it, perhaps, simply a transformation, an evolution of information into something beyond our understanding? The physics of the soul, a journey of information. Throughout this documentary, we've seen how the concept of information plays a pivotal role in our understanding of consciousness. Whether we look at the quantum field, the holographic universe, or theories like panpsychism, we find that the fabric of reality might be woven together by information, an eternal, ever-present force that shapes the very nature of existence. Information, it turns out, is not just a passive byproduct of physical processes, it is the fabric of the universe itself. In quantum mechanics, we've learned that particles exist not as solid objects, but as probabilities, waves of information that collapse into definite states only when observed. The universe, it seems, may be more of an informational construct than a physical one, with the very laws of nature acting as rules for how information is processed across space and time. If consciousness is also a form of information, as suggested by many of the theories we've explored, then we are faced with a profound possibility. What if the soul is simply an informational pattern, one that is encoded in the very structure of the universe, and that can persist beyond the death of the physical body? This idea doesn't negate the biological aspect of consciousness. We are still deeply tied to our bodies, and the neural networks of our brains play a crucial role in how we process the world and experience awareness. But it suggests that information, the very thing that makes us who we are, might not be bound by the limits of the brain. Perhaps in some way, information, the essence of the soul, can continue beyond death, the end, or a transformation. In considering whether consciousness can survive death, we must confront the traditional notion of death. For much of human history, death has been viewed as the ultimate end, the final cessation of life and consciousness. When we die, our bodies decompose, our brains shut down, and our memories fade into oblivion. The biological view of death holds that once the brain ceases to function, consciousness ceases as well, but the informational perspective offers a radically different view. If the soul is a pattern of information, an informational thread that connects us to the greater cosmos, then death might not be the end of consciousness, but rather a transformation. Instead of disappearing into nothingness, the information that constitutes our identity may continue, transforming into another form, or merging with the universal consciousness that permeates all of reality. This idea finds support in quantum mechanics, where information is seen as fundamental to the universe and nothing can be truly destroyed. The black hole information paradox suggests that even in the most extreme conditions, when matter is believed to be destroyed, the information that constitutes it is preserved. Perhaps in a similar way, when the body dies, the information that constitutes our soul, our memories, our experiences, our essence is not lost, but simply shifted to another form or dimension. Death, in this sense, may not be an end, but a transition, a journey from one state of being to another. Just as information in the quantum field can be redistributed and transformed, perhaps the soul is an informational entity that can continue to exist beyond the body, evolving and merging with the greater universal consciousness. The soul and cosmic consciousness. The idea that consciousness is not confined to the individual but is part of a universal consciousness is a theme that has appeared throughout the documentary. Whether through panpsychism, the Akashic records, or cosmic consciousness, we have seen that the universe itself may be conscious, a living, interconnected mind that spans the entire cosmos. In this view, the individual soul is not a separate entity but part of a greater cosmic intelligence, and when we die, we may simply merge back into this greater cosmic mind, continuing to exist in a different form. With an expanded awareness, this perspective challenges the traditional dualistic view of the soul, which posits a separate, unchanging essence that survives death. Instead, it suggests that the soul is more like an informational pattern, one that is interconnected with the greater cosmic intelligence. When the body dies, the soul does not vanish, but is reabsorbed into the cosmic consciousness, continuing to exist in a form that transcends the physical realm. A philosophical reflection. The infinite unknown As we ponder these possibilities, the survival of information, the nature of the soul, the continuity of consciousness, we are reminded of the humility with which we must approach these questions. Despite all of our scientific advancements, we are still only beginning to understand the true nature of consciousness, the soul, and the universe. Perhaps in the end, the greatest mystery of all is not whether consciousness survives death, but what happens to it once it does. If consciousness is not tied to the brain or the body, but is part of the universal fabric of existence, then the true nature of the afterlife may be beyond our comprehension. It may be a process of evolution, a transformation of information into something beyond our understanding. We may never fully grasp the nature of the soul or the afterlife, but the very fact that we can ask these questions, the fact that we are able to contemplate the mysteries of existence, is itself a profound testament to the nature of consciousness. In a universe where information is eternal, where consciousness might transcend time and space, perhaps death is not an end, but a beginning, the transformation of the self into something greater, something more profound. So, as we reach the end of this journey, let us leave with a sense of awe and wonder at the mysteries that remain. Perhaps death is not the end, but a transformation, an evolution of information into something beyond our understanding, a return to the source of all consciousness, where we continue to exist in a form that we cannot yet fully comprehend. The universe is vast and the mind is infinite. Perhaps the answers we seek are waiting to be discovered in ways we have yet to imagine.